Thank you guys for joining me as we talk about optimizing your ultrasound radiology workflow. Let's jump in. So let's talk about it a little bit, right? First off, when we talk about workflow, if we define it, it's not just the act of actually scanning on the device, right? There's things that have to take place before the scan, and there's things that have to take place after the scan. There's a whole operational aspect of it too, right? There's managing the fleet that is in addition to the clinical components. And then if we go back to after the scan, you also have to think about reporting, right? That's the ultimate output of the workflow. But let's dig in here and let's take a look. So first off, what are some of the challenges that are facing radiology today? Well, today, ultrasound is growing a lot faster than imaging. In fact, it's growing about 8 times faster. Why? For a lot of reasons, actually. Ultrasound is a lot more accessible. In fact, with the introduction and advent of handheld ultrasound, we're seeing it becoming way more prevalent. Also the fact that it's not ionizing, it's also lower cost, is creating, making ultrasound just a lot more prevalent in practice and care. But in addition to the growth of ultrasound, which is also a proxy, if you will, for the workload that's taking place, there's staffing challenges, right? 80% of radiologists are talking about the challenge that we have with actually performing ultrasound. And if I kind of use some of the language that Chad from Kios used earlier this week, you can go watch his presentation. Simply saying, look, the workload is going up, but the workforce challenge is the workforce is going down, ultimately creating this imbalance. In addition, some other interesting facts. In the EU, ESR, their position on this is that everyone should be doing a full interpretive report. Turns out only half the people are doing them, half the radiologists. In reporting, if you don't report it, how are we going to communicate this? How are we going to manage that workflow if we don't have it written down on paper? And finally, efficiency. 73% of radiologists complain, or they say that is their biggest challenge, right? They want to really solve for efficiency. In fact, let's focus on this word efficiency, because that's really what workflow is all about, right? How do we become more efficient? So if we define it, first off, efficiency is very basic, right? Saving time. The cousin of efficiency is your ability to do more. So we can figure out how do we shrink down the activities so we can fit more into the same time is one of the biggest objectives of people in ultrasound. But if we look further, let's talk about other ways we can talk about efficiency. If we're reducing callbacks, meaning if we can reduce the way by which we can bring patients back and rescan them, right? That's redundancy. Not doing those is more efficient. Reproducibility. So a lot of times we talk about standards and how things are reported or how the protocols are supposed to be. It turns out there's a lot of variability, and that variability leads to either errors or it leads to inconsistencies that create dialogue that then can lead to repeat tests. So if we can just become more reproducible, we can become more efficient. Quicker diagnosis. This is a clinical one. If we zoom out and we look at the whole care pathway, and if we can find a way to more earlier diagnose a patient, then all of the downstream activities that go into caring for them and managing them is causing the whole system to be more efficient. Zooming back in on the ultrasound device, this is one that Tomas Barlata used in his presentation yesterday. But if we can go from knobology to what he called noology, meaning I'm not turning knobs, right? Just by definition, that is going to be more efficient. So all these different ways, and I'm sure there's more that you guys can think of in ways that we can be more efficient or that you can be more efficient in how you deliver care, and especially in ultrasound and especially in radiology. But what options do we have? How do we actually tackle this? How do we become more efficient? So if we dig deeper into these pain points, I mentioned operational workflows. Normally that means managing a fleet. So you have your clinicians that are doing the day-to-day job on the device, but managing those devices is a job by itself, right? Keeping the protocols up to date, making sure that those devices are up and running and cared for, that whole aspect if not done well, means that your clinician won't be able to do the scans, which is going to lead to lost slots and inefficiency. We can also talk about training as another example, right? In this whole kind of workforce challenge that we have. I'm learning more about EU statistics, but I can tell you that in the US, there's a lot of challenges right now in terms of the level of training that sonographers come into with and what that means to the practice of care. So how can we either train them better, or how can we communicate with them, or how can we somehow give them that lift to make them, better, faster, ultimately more efficient? Well, look no further, because what I want to talk to you about is something that we have launched in 2024 called Verisound. And I'm really excited. It's a brand new umbrella branding that we launched in the US, and it's coming to the EU in pieces and more shortly. But this is really our thought and our approach to how we solve for a lot of these inefficiency problems. And so the idea is with Verisound, we can become more efficient. So let's dive in. There's a couple pieces, and I'll go into more detail. But we have the 4 pillars, right? We have collaboration, which is more or less a lot of that real-time activity with somebody that is remote. Today, actually, one of the biggest challenges that we have with the workforce, given that they're shrinking, means that expertise is not always in the same place. So providing that help is not a matter of walking down the hall to the next door. Providing that help means having to get in a car and drive hours. That's just not possible. So this notion of collaboration is one that we will talk about more. Verisound Fleet Management is something where we tackle the operational side, right? I talked about fleet and protocols and whatnot. We'll go a little bit deeper there. Reporting, I think I said this early on, right? If you don't report it, it didn't happen. But sometimes there's errors, sometimes there's inefficiencies that take place during the reporting process. So look, we have a tool for that. And then Verisound AI, I'll talk more about it, but really this is just that collection of AI tools that everyone has talked about for most of the presentations this week that really help with the efficiencies of the exam process. And I'll cover more of that in a moment. So first, let's talk about Verisound Fleet Management. There's 3 capabilities or solutions we have today. One is called Verisound Fleet, and this is looking and helping our consoles, radiology, women's health, and cardiovascular, all consoles, really manage 2 things. 1, the protocols, and then number 2, the configurations. Right? All of that can be stored and backed up in the cloud versus what today, for those of us that have been a part of this process for the better part of probably 2-3 decades. Today, the process is running around with these things, these little USB sticks. Like this is how today it's managed. I think they call it sneaker net, where you're literally running around and going to every device and plugging it in. But doing that is really inefficient if you think about it. Why not instead, at the push of a button, take a configuration, a protocol change that we've identified and want to make, and just do it now? Why wait the 6 months? The next one on the list is Ultrasound Excellence. This is something that's available exclusively in the EU at the moment, but this is really getting at fleet analytics, right? Which of my scan rooms is operating better? Where do I have misses in my calendar? Where do I have missed slots? Which sonographer or radiologist is performing better or worse at particular types of exams? Seeing that data is really important for you to take action on it. Unless you have the information, you won't be able to. And that's where Ultrasound Excellence comes into play, really helping you get that analytic insight. And then finally, My Device Hub. This is similar to Verisound Fleet, but it's really focused on the handheld device, right? This is a little bit different, so that solution is just focused here. But I want to take a moment and let's double click on Verisound Fleet for just a second. So back in 2022, we did a study to actually look at the impact of Verisound Fleet on an organization. And we did that by comparing what happened before, in the before world, right, using these USB sticks, and after with Verisound Fleet, with a population of roughly 28 devices. To go around and update those devices, and again, this is an institution where the norm was update once or twice a year. And I heard that religiously from actually almost every customer in the US, like we do this once or twice a year. Because there's a massive process behind it in terms of collecting the protocols, collecting the changes, right? Because there's always something that's found that we can do better, right? Continuous improvement happens everywhere. And then there's a whole process to verify, validate, make sure that, yes, my gold master is good, before we then go through the entire painstaking process of pushing it out to all the devices. And by pushing, it's actually literally going and plugging them in. So before, took that process for 28 devices took 15 hours over about 16 days. So 15 hours of actually working on creating or distributing those configurations. The 16 days is driving, waiting for a scanner to free up across probably a small number of folks. But then with Verisound Fleet, that changed. You can see it took only 7 minutes. Literally, the push of a button in that 7 minutes was more the time it took to restart the device once that preset was loaded or once that configuration was loaded. And the 44 hours you see is, again, the wait time, and that's just waiting for the last person to click accept on the device. You do the math, and that's 99% less effort and 8 times faster. I think that sounds like efficient to me. But there's even more efficiency here besides just, okay, great. We used to do it once or twice a year, but there's a capacity challenge, right? As I mentioned before, there's a whole process behind how they collect all these changes. Why wait? If you find, or a sonographer finds, or a clinician finds a challenge or a problem in a protocol, why wait 6 months? You can massively reduce that to a time that you can do it once a week if you wanted to. So what we actually saw with St. Luke's is they've now kind of averaged out around doing updates once or twice a month versus once or twice a year. And that's really unlocked capacity to help create standardization for that organization. Because now there's actually a trust aspect with all the users of the devices that they're not getting a new gold master or a new update and then a week later, oh, there's a problem. Because you find a problem and then you're like, well, why are we trying to go through this standardization effort if all I find is problems? The other thing, indirectly from a clinical perspective, that Verisound Fleet has on the workflow is all that wait time that I was talking about in terms of, well, not only waiting to get on the device, but once you're on the device, you have to go through the process of updating it, and that usually takes away a scan slot. You can have all those back, right? So about 20 minutes per exam room per update is saved with Verisound Fleet. Finally, staff satisfaction. I've already been talking about this archaic process. Before Verisound Fleet, roughly only 3 people within 10 of the entire process that was involved, whether it's the biomed or whether it's the sonographers or whether it's a radiologist or the admins or whoever. Only 30% of the people were like happy with the process. They felt good about it. As you can imagine, we're even doing better than dentists. We're at 10 out of 10 now with Verisound Fleet. So let's shift gears now, okay? That was the operational world. Let's start to shift maybe a little bit more clinical. So in the collaboration space, we have 2 different offerings. One is called Digital Expert Connect, and the other is called My Remote Share. Both very similar in terms of what they do. And again, the My Remote Share solution is built for the handheld device. This is all about real-time collaboration. This is all about bringing what is on the screen of the ultrasound device to somebody remote so they can provide help and guidance. So no longer do they have to travel or be right there. They can do it from wherever they are. And we actually have multiple customers in the US today in radiology that are using it as a support tool. What do I mean by that? These new sonographers that are less trained, or anybody that has like less training, runs into some challenges. And when they run these challenges, they need help. So you can imagine in the old days, right? Somebody can walk into the room behind you and kind of tell you what to do. Now imagine you're getting that same kind of help, except now you're just getting it virtually. So remotely, somebody can see the screen, they can tell you what's going on, how to manipulate the probe. It's a very easy, simple way to provide that help without having to physically be there. And it really helps with the distribution of the workforce. So a bit more on collaboration and kind of what are these challenges that we face. I started to talk about it a little bit, but the complex cases are usually the ones that get us, right? It's not the standard liver or the, I'll make it up, maybe kidney. But in some of the work that we've done, usually OB tends to be a complex space, especially in shared services where you have some folks in radiology actually trying to do some OB exams. We actually, again, we're working with some customers to capture more of this data statistically, but kind of anecdotally, we're seeing some improvements in terms of just the time that they save with Digital Expert from where they were before to where they are after in terms of managing these complex cases, because they have that help and support. I talked about the remote sites a little bit. Sometimes the patient requires support. We see this a lot more in women's health, where in the US at least, there's a phenomenon with maternal fetal medicine where there's just an absolute shortage of MFM doctors. And usually, and probably not too different in Europe, the doctors, they can't be everywhere. And usually it's the rural parts of the world that then are left having to travel a longer distance to the more urban parts. Well, with Digital Expert now, it's given MFMs that comfort to be able to have that exam done remotely, and then they can, after the exam's done, that MFM can actually turn and talk to the patient, again, remotely, before they leave the room. Because there's nothing worse than being an expecting mother, have an examination done and not be able to talk to anybody, and not know what's going on. That'd create a lot of anxiety. So these MFMs are used in that particular case. And I'm sure there's probably situations in radiology and elsewhere where you may want to have that patient connection as a remote, either physician or clinician. The staffing shortage, as I mentioned, this is more kind of purely on a training sense, right? Can we train people remotely without having to physically be there all the time? I also mentioned a little bit on the limited expertise, but oftentimes what we've seen is Digital Expert helps bring that knowledge base or bring that capability of a sonographer or a newer person in the industry faster now, right? They're no longer kind of fumbling themselves. They don't have these after-the-fact email conversations. It's more of a real-time kind of fix and correct. So if we keep going, once we get to reporting, we have a product today that's been around for a while, and that one under the umbrella is known as Viewpoint. So Viewpoint exists across radiology, women's health, cardiovascular, new to the point of care space. And in that space specifically, it starts to solve some additional challenges. But I'll go back to radiology. There was a study that GE had done a number of years ago that showed that 1 in 5 radiology reports contain some kind of dictation error. And so Viewpoint came up with a solution called Direct Connect, which effectively takes those numbers, those really important details out of the ultrasound exam and directly maps them into the report. In countries where reimbursement compliance matters, there's a lot to be said there in terms of how, again, having that report be documented accurately and well translates into revenue. There's been studies done in the US, at least more recently, in the point of care space where ultrasound's new, and not doing the exam right and not doing that well leads to missed opportunities for reimbursement. And it's not just point of care. There's some other studies that were done, even in radiology, where there was just missed reports, missed exams. It didn't flow through well. Viewpoint helped actually lift that reimbursement opportunity. And then the workflow piece, again, reporting can be different in different parts of the world. But there's some statistics that show that Viewpoint has the ability to really optimize that workflow. And finally, AI. So I could either go through and redo all the presentations that you guys had this week, or I can try to just basically summarize it and say, we talk about fleet, we talk about collaboration, we talk about reporting, we talk about efficiency, right? What is AI? Chad said this earlier in the week. You can go back and watch his presentation. He spent a lot of time talking about how AI is really an efficiency tool. And if you break it down into 3 different areas, we have guided ultrasound AI. And for those that are aware of an acquisition that GE did recently of Caption Care, that's all about cardiac guidance, right? How can we take a novice user, how can we take any one of you in the room and get you to do a cardiac exam? That's what scan guidance is all about. And you can just start to think about how that makes things more efficient. Workflow productivity, when you're on the device, I'm sure Russ could tell us about all of the R4 releases that are out that contain numerous AI solutions that help to automate the measurements, automate some of the identification, all things that before were very manual. And then finally, clinical decision support. This gets us back to Kios. This gets us to Pure, right? How do we have those tools that help us make better decisions? So from an Verasound perspective, it's not new. It's just taking all those same things that we know and are aware of and then talking about them in the context of workflow efficiency. So that is the entire portfolio of Verisound. Again, if we recap, we have collaboration, we have fleet management, we have reporting, and we have a lot of AI. If we go back and we talk about all those efficiency challenges I talked about in the beginning, these will help to address nearly every single one of those in some way, shape, or form. So, at 4:35 here on a Friday, for those that want to come talk, happy to. But we at GE Healthcare here are happy and excited to help put together a plan to make your institution more efficient. So thank you.